Here we're going to talk about biconditionals, and my recommendation would be to take your little foldable that you created for the conditionals, converse, inverse, contrapositive, and just flip it over to the back side. That side's all clean, and you can put this on there because it has to do with conditional statements. But what a biconditional is I'm going to actually, before I say what it is, I'm going to look at what's involved. You have conditional here, so it has something to do with a conditional statement, but then I noticed that there's by in front of it. Well, by meaning two, conditional we talked about yesterday. So what we have is we have two conditional statements put together as one, and the two conditionals that we actually have would be the conditional and then its converse, and we're going to take those two, put them together using the words if and only if. And notice sometimes we'll use the abbreviation IFF. That's not a misspelling of the word if, that's just the abbreviation for if and only if. And then when you get to the symbolism part, come down here, we have this would be read as P, if and only if, Q. Same thing here, P, if and only if, Q. Just two different ways. You can use the double arrows, or you can use IFF. They come back to this one here, and it's kind of like the conditional statement where it would be P and then an arrow to the right to Q. But being it's a biconditional statement, it means it really goes either way. So it could also be Q going back to the left to P. So there's what your biconditional is. Now, a couple examples of it. I'm going to give you a conditional statement here in blue. If an angle is 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. What I want to do is write the converse. So I'd hit pause, write it down, see if you can get it right, and then unpause it to see what the converse of the statement is. Remember the converse, we just switched the order. So now I'm going to have if an angle is a right angle, then it is 90 degrees. Now, to take these two statements and put them together, really what we're going to do is we're going to identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. So I'm just going to go like this, and I'm going to say, well, if an angle is 90 degrees, there's your hypothesis. Then, and then it is a right angle, there's your conclusion. When you come down here, you really have the same things going down on. An angle is a right angle. That's the same thing as right here. It is a right angle. And then here we have it is 90 degrees. Well, that's the same thing as up here. Now we don't have to take these two and totally use all of them. All we're going to do is we're going to use the hypothesis of one, the conclusion of the one, and write our biconditional. And the way we do it is just say the hypothesis, if and only if, the conclusion, and we end up here. Now what I want you to realize about this is you could switch the order here because it's a biconditional. That doesn't matter. So we could have said an angle is a right angle if and only if it is 90 degrees. Either one is acceptable, and either one is just as good as the other one. Now, if you want to determine whether a conditional statement is true or false, what we have to do is we have to go back to our original conditional, and we have to look at this and go, is this true or false? So if an angle is 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. In this case, that's true. Then I'm going to come here to the converse. If an angle is a right angle, then it is 90 degrees. Again, that's true. So if the conditional is true and the converse is true, then the biconditional will be true. And the way to help you remember, well, if it's true and false, what's the whole thing? Is it going to be true or false? Notice, you have the word and in here. We have a conjunction, going back to what we talked about a few days ago. If it's and, how much of these statements have to be true to make the whole thing true? Well, the answer to that is everything has to be true to make the biconditional true. If one of these is false, or both of them are false, the whole thing is false. So keep that in mind. This is really another form of a conjunction. Now I have another one. Now this time I gave you the biconditional, and I want us to pull out the conditional statement and then write the converse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my statement. I'm going to identify the if and only if. I see that that's usually right there in the middle. Maybe not perfectly in the middle, but really close. So if and only if. Well, then what that's going to tell me is that I have the hypothesis. It's going to be in front of it. So this part right here is my hypothesis, and then it's going to be a little harder to circle all this. I'll give it a shot. Here, it is the midpoint. There's your conclusion. Well then, to write my conditional statement, I just have to say if a point bisects a segment, then it is the midpoint. And that's what I have for my conditional statement. Converse, well now you can just go back to this and switch the order, and you'll have your converse. Now what you need to remember about these two things is really you could switch them around. If you wanted to call this the conditional statement and then this one the converse, that would be okay. Because it's a biconditional, it really goes both ways. But then if I want to figure out if this is true or false, come back here now, look at your conditional and your converse. So I'm going to look at this. If a point bisects a segment, then it is the midpoint. That's a true statement. If a point is the midpoint, then it bisects the segment. That's also true. Which means then the whole conditional statement that we started with is going to be true. Now I gave you two examples here where they came out to be true, but remember, if either one of these comes out to be false, the biconditional as a whole would have then been false. But being they're both true, my biconditional is true. And that will conclude our lesson on biconditionals.